No, it doesn't. That's not. You can tell because you.
Morning, everybody. Unless there's like a formal calling of the case, which I don't think there is, everyone is free to be seated, attorneys included. And I'm sorry to make everyone wait awkwardly, but just give me a second to look at the case binder. Okay, at the risk of telling you things you already know, all of our ballots are electronic, so we may need, first of all, if I'm looking at my phone while you're talking, it's not for any other purpose than to score you. Same with the judges. Secondly, I'm actually confused. One side and the other side, is that what's going on?
Yes,
but like,
yes, Your Honor.
Okay, cool. Which side, who represents the people?
Your Honor, Travis Harper for the people.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Harper.
And Ruby Scanlon for the defense.
Good morning, Ms. Scanlon.
Good morning.
Okay, first let me check with the judges. Is everybody able to access their ballots?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, let's start with, before I call the case, let me ask both sides. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about like the conduct of the trial, housekeeping, anything like that, before we entertain any kind of motions? I'll hear from the people first. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Your Honor, the people do have a few just preliminary housekeeping matters like you mentioned.
Go ahead.
First, can we make formal introductions for the court?
Yeah, would you like to do that now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go right ahead.
Good morning. My name's Travis Harper, joined here today by my colleague, Ms. Stella Asmer.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Morning.
Together, we represent the people of the United States of America. Would you
Morning,
like your
sir.
introductions for the defense or going straight into those housekeeping matters?
Let's hear from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. My name is Ruby Scanlon. Today I'm joined by my colleague, Megan Muntz.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And together we represent the defendant, Augie Shepard.
Morning. Okay, Mr. Harper and Ms. Scanlon?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Harper, go ahead.
I just want to refer your attention to a pretrial order signed by Judge Stebbins in the district court, specifically stipulation 8.
Okay, I see it.
Your Honor, me and Ms. Scanlon have agreed that there are actually certain exhibits that are admissible without any objection once the record is open, specifically exhibits 4 through 4, 5, 6, 7. And we plan to offer those exhibits into evidence once the record is open.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may,
Excuse me, 3, 4, 5, 6. My apologies.
that's our understanding.
Okay, are you just referring me to stipulation 8?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you can assume that I've read the stipulations, and if ever I violate the stipulations, just remind me and I'll apologize and we'll go from there.
Of course, Your Honor, no worries. We'd also just like to ask your preferences in regards to approaching opposing counsel, the witness, and the bench.
Is the witness about to be right here?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. I don't have any preferences. If you may freely move about the courtroom during opening and closing statements. You don't need to ask permission for any reason during opening and closing statements. If you need to approach the witness or approach the bench, please ask permission. You may approach each other as you see fit, just don't look at each other's notes. But otherwise, you don't need permission to go give something to opposing counsel or anything like that.
Of course, Your Honor. Finally, we'd just like to invoke Rule 615, calls for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses barring party representatives. Today, the state doesn't have a party rep.
Okay. Rule 615 is invoked.
With that, Your Honor, we're ready to go to opening statements.
Okay. Ms. Scanlon, anything you'd like to talk about before we hear opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor, just a couple of things. First, we'd move to invoke Rule 603, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses,
Sure.
just to speed things up.
Sure, all the witnesses are hereby sworn in.
Second, we'd like to offer Exhibit 10 into evidence. And pursuant to Stipulation 11, this document has already been authenticated.
As part of those grounds, Your Honor?
As far as the authentication grounds, you don't need to respond. It looks like that was stipulated to, but you may give me your position on the admission of Exhibit 10.
Yes, Your Honor, apologies, that's what I meant.
Go ahead.
Just like to wait until the record is open and a witness can actually authenticate specific document that that's talking about before we actually offer it into evidence.
The record is already open, and it looks like it's an authentic document. Do you have another reason why you might want the witness to consider Exhibit 10 other than to verify its authenticity?
No, Your Honor, just to verify that the document that they're looking at in their hand is what it purports to be, that it's that specific Exhibit 8.
May I
But,
respond?
Hold on, hold on. You're talking about Exhibit 10.
Oh, excuse me, Exhibit 10, or whichever exhibit was supposed to be entered into evidence under Stipulation 10.
Okay. Ms. Scanlon, are you talking about Exhibit 10?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So, Mr. Harper, the way I read the stipulation is that Exhibit 10 is authentic, right? Do you also read it that way?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so what value do you see in having the witness testify as to its authenticity, given that you've stipulated that it's authentic?
Just not that the exhibit itself is not what it purports to be, just that the piece of paper that we're holding in trial is the right exhibit. That's the only thing I'm asking for, but if that foundation isn't necessary, we can just offer it into the record. We did stipulate that it was authentic and that it's a public record.
Okay, do you have any other objections besides authenticity?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, then Exhibit 10 is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, we're ready to go with opening statements.
Okay. I declared very confidently to Mr. Harper that the record was already open. As you know, there's no court reporter and we're all kind of playing pretend. But I'll just for the sake of authenticity, the case is now called between United States and Augie Shepard. My name's John Bishop. I've been assigned to preside over the matter. Your jurors are the four of them. We are all filling out a ballot. And so please don't forget to look at me as you make your opening and closing statements. You can treat me as a member of the jury during that time. I've already gone over housekeeping with the parties in some fashion. Whether it was on the record or off, I'm not sure. Just to be sure, Exhibit 10 was admitted and various instructions were given to the parties about how to conduct themselves during trial. We will all follow their lead because they are far more professional, certainly than I, and probably for the rest of the people in the room as well. The parties have represented, they have nothing else to say other than what's already been said, and we're ready to go to opening statement, and so I'll hear first from Mr. Harper and the people.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, sir.
May it please the court? Ms. Scanlon. Members of the jury, he made the right choice against the wrong person. It's June of 2018, and a man named Barry Capello is holding hands with his wife as they walk up to their new home in Los Angeles, California. They go up the doorway, they go up to the front door. But the person opening that door, not a real estate agent or contractor, no. It's a federal marshal. You see, just a few weeks ago, Mr. Capello had testified that this defendant, Augie Shepard, was a mob boss. So Mr. Capello knew he could never be Mr. Capello again. He knew he had to go into witness protection. But what Mr. Capello didn't know was that 3 years later, his past would catch up. What he didn't know is that 3 years later, that same mob boss he testified against would run into him in Los Angeles. What he didn't know was that 3 years later, his wife would walk out that same door, down that same driveway to see her husband dead on the ground, strangled to death with jumper cables. Members of the jury, the evidence is going to show that wasn't a coincidence. It was revenge. Because Mr. Capello, he made the right choice, but he made it against the wrong person. that's why we've charged this defendant with murder and retaliation against a witness. And as the government, we carry what's called a burden of proof. But all that means is that it's our job today to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, 3 things are true. First, that this defendant killed Mr. Capello. Second, that he did so deliberately. And third, that he did so with the intent to retaliate against Mr. Capello for testifying in that trial. We're going to meet our burden today, members of the jury. Because we're going to ask you to pay attention to 3 simple facts, and if you do, you'll realize Mr. Capello made the right choice against the wrong person. So let's go to fact number 1. The defendant wanted Mr. Capello dead. Today you're actually going to hear from that federal marshal that helped relocate Mr. Capello in witness protection. He's going to tell you that Mr. Capello called this defendant a mob boss in open court in front of multiple witnesses. He's going to tell you that testifying against the mob, it's a death sentence. So, maybe asking, how did he even find Mr. Capello? That's fact number 2. He ran into him in Los Angeles. Today you're going to learn that the defendant was on a college tour in Los Angeles with his daughter. And that same weekend, he saw Mr. Capello. But you won't have to take my word for it. Today you're going to hear a voicemail from Mr. Capello himself. A voicemail where he says, I just made eye contact with this defendant. They caught me. 12 hours later, he was dead. But how do we even know that the defendant did that killing? Fact number 3. The defendant was seen at the scene of the crime. Today you're actually going to learn that there was an eyewitness. Mr. Capello's neighbor saw that entire crime occur, but not just that. He's going to tell you that he saw this defendant. He saw this defendant pull to the defendant's house, to Mr. Capello's house. He saw this defendant strangle Mr. Capello to death. He saw this defendant because Mr. Capello made the right choice testifying against him. But Mr. Capello made the right choice against the wrong person. At the end of this trial, I'm going to come before you again. I'm going to review all the evidence that you've heard today. And I'm going to ask you to find the only verdict consistent with that evidence. Guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Ms. Scanlon, when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, Mr. Harper, members of the jury, where is Adriana Capello? When Mr. Harper got up here and told you the government's version of events, I noticed he left a few things out. See, he didn't tell you that today you're not going to see a shred of forensic evidence tying Mr. Shepard to this crime. No DNA, no fingerprints, no. He also didn't tell you that on the night of the murder, Mr. Shepard's cell phone location data puts him nowhere near Mr. Capello, but instead at his hotel room the entire night. And he didn't tell you that there was someone else. Someone who knew exactly where Mr. Capello lived. Someone who admits that they were there at the scene of the crime at the time of the crime, and someone who had every reason to want to hurt Mr. Capello. His wife, Adriana Capello. So where is she? Where is Adriana Capello? Because that's not a name you heard in Mr. Harper's opening statement. That's not a witness you'll hear from today. Well, we'll ask you today to remember that question, because that question is a problem for the prosecution. And it's a question they chose to ignore. Now today, the prosecution bears the burden of proof, and today they had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest bar in our legal system, that Augie Shepard murdered Barry Capello. But today, they won't be able to meet their burden, and to show you why, we'll ask you to focus on two problems with the state's case. First, the evidence that is inconsistent with Augie Shepard having committed this crime. And second, the evidence that points to Adriana Capello. So let's talk about that first problem with the government's case. Because today you'll learn that the entire reason that Augie Shepard was in Los Angeles in the first place was that he was visiting colleges with his daughter. That his daughter, Lauren Shepard, who you'll hear from on the stand today, didn't notice anything off about her father. Didn't hear him name Barry Capello. Didn't see any scratches or bruises on him the day after this alleged crime occurred. You also hear that the police recovered cell phone location data from the phone of Mr. Shepard. And that location data doesn't put him anywhere near the scene of the crime. No, it puts him in his hotel room that entire night. But you'll also learn about the evidence that points not to Augie Shepard, but to Adriana Capello. Because you'll learn that Barry Capello had a wife. And that when Barry Capello joined the witness protection program, she had to be relocated with him. Learn that she had a small business back in Philadelphia. She had to give it up. Learn that she had to cut off all contact with her friends, with her family. That Adriana Capello had to give up her own name. So when on June 25th of 2021, she learns that the man that Barry Capello testified against is suddenly in Los Angeles, she sees her opportunity. The opportunity to get back at her husband and pin it all on Mr. Shepard. Where is Adriana Capello? We'll ask you to remember to think about that question when the government presents their case. And then at the end of today's trial, I'll come before you again and ask that you find Augie Shepard not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Harper, are the people ready to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Before we call our first witness, we'd just like to move Exhibits 3, 4, 5, and 6 into evidence. These are all witness statements that the marshal reviewed in reviewing this case. They're agreed to be admissible without any objection.
Okay, Ms. Scanlon, any comment on Exhibits 3 through 6?
No, Your Honor, that's our understanding of the stipulation.
Okay, Exhibits 3 through 6 are admitted.
With that, Your Honor, the government calls Marshal Connor Wright to the stand.
Okay, is Marshal Wright in the room? Are you the marshal?
Yes, Your Honor.
Come on up, sir. Okay, you were constructively sworn in by rule earlier. Do you understand what that means?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, great. Have a seat. We don't have a record, but please keep your voice up. I'll, of course, be able to hear you, but everyone else needs to also.
Yes, Your Honor.
When you're ready, Mr. Harper.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
My name is Connor Wright.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a federal marshal with the U.S. Marshal's Office.
How long have you been doing that?
I've been deputy marshal for about 14 years now.
Well, I want to turn to today's case. Sir, do you know someone named Barry Capello?
Yes, actually in 2018 I helped relocate Mr. Capello.
And do you know where Mr. Capello is now?
Yes, I relocated him to Los Angeles.
Was Mr. Capello still alive today, Marshal?
No, Mr. Capello was murdered in 2021.
Were you involved in that case at all?
Yes, I was the lead criminal investigator into the murder of Barry Capello.
And did you have any suspects in that case?
Yes, in October of 2021, I arrested Mr. Augie Shepard in connection with that murder.
Well, I want to see if we can figure out if Mr. Shepard wanted Mr. Capello dead. Sir, why did you have to relocate Mr. Capello in the first place?
Mr. Capello was put in witness protection because he was a member of the DeBruno crime family. After a lifetime of crime, he chose to make the right choice and testified against the crime family.
Did he testify against this defendant?
Yes, Mr. Capello named Augie Shepard as the head of the DeBruno crime family.
So what did you do when Mr. Capello named this defendant as the head of that family in open court?
We understood that he was in a highly dangerous position, and so we relocated him to Los Angeles and changed his name to Tom Kline.
Well, then I want to go to the night that Mr. Capello died. When was that?
That was the early morning of June 26, 2021.
Did you go to the scene yourself?
Yes, I arrived shortly after he was murdered.
Did you see Mr. Capello?
Yes, I saw Mr. Capello's body.
What did you see? What did he look like?
It looked like there was bruising around his neck, and there were a pair of jumper cables lying on the ground right next to him.
Were you able to confirm Mr. Capello's cause of death?
Yes, we actually recovered DNA evidence from those jumper cables that showed skin cells from his neck on the cables.
Then I want to talk about whether or not this defendant might have ran into Mr. Capello earlier that day. Had Mr. Capello informed you of any threats at all?
Yes, on the previous day, June 25th, Mr. Capello left me a voicemail indicating that he had actually seen Mr. Augie Shepard.
Objection, Your Honor, to more misleading than probative under Rule 403. If I could be heard.
You may.
Mr. Harper's exact question on the record was, did you hear that Barry Capello had received any threats on June 25th? We audited it on a good faith basis. That witness is going to go on to say that he saw or might have seen Augie Shepard, but that's not a threat, and we believe the phrasing of this question to be misleading.
Response, Your Honor?
You may.
First, in order for this evidence to be excluded, the risk of unfair prejudice must substantially outweigh any probative value that this testimony has. Your Honor, the jury's going to have that voicemail when they go back in the deliberation room. And I also disagree with Ms. Scanlon's characterization of that voicemail. He does say that he sees Mr. Shepard, but after that he says, I think they got me. He was scared. Your Honor, that's sufficient to be a threat, and it certainly doesn't meet the threshold of Rule 403 to exclude this testimony. It's a matter for cross.
Ms. Scanlon, could you clarify for me, were you objecting to the witness's answer, or were you objecting to the question by Mr. Harper?
Your Honor, I was objecting to the phrasing of the question by Mr. Harper, that it was a threat. When that voicemail just says, I think I saw Augie Shepard, I think he got me, there's no threat that Barry Capello received.
Okay. Do you have an objection to the witness's answer?
No, Your Honor, just to the question.
Okay. Then, given the bar for 403 objections is, as Mr. Harper mentioned, fairly high, I'm going to overrule the objection. In this case also, I don't think that the answer reflected the concern that you articulated about the question, and so I'm not concerned that there would be prejudice for that reason. Feel free to renew the objection to the form of the question if you, prior to the witness's answer, if another question is posed that you feel might be prejudicial.
Yes,
So
Your Honor.
the objection's overruled, the answer will stand, and Mr. Harper, you can ask your next question.
Yes, Your Honor. Marshall, would you recognize that voicemail if I played it for you today?
Yes, I would.
All right, this time we're going to be playing that voicemail, Exhibit 8.
Call me when you get this. I think they found me. Augie Shepard just walked by my office window. We made eye contact.
Do you recognize that voice?
Yes,
Who is it?
that was Mr. Barry Capello.
Your Honor, at this time, the government offers Exhibit 8 into evidence.
No objection.
Exhibit 8's admitted.
So, you said that this voicemail, it was left on June 26th. What time was it made at?
It was at 12:50 p.m.
And do we know where the defendant was at that time?
We recovered receipts placing him at two nearby restaurants at 12:47 p.m. and 12:52 p.m.
And I want to move on to whether or not we can tie the defendant to the scene of the crime. Earlier you mentioned you found jumper cables. Would you be able to recognize those if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would.
All right, let the record reflect I'm approaching Ms. Scanlon and the witness in turn. Let them pre-mark the video. Thank you. Here you go. Marshall, what have I just handed you?
These are a pair of black and red nylite jumper cables.
Do they look the same as when you last saw them?
They look exactly the same.
Your Honor, at this time, the government offers Exhibit 25 into evidence.
Any objection to Exhibit 25?
No, Your Honor.
25 is admitted.
So, at the scene of the crime, did you find any forensic evidence at all?
Yes, we were actually able to recover footprints from the scene of the crime.
What size were those footprints?
They were size 11.
What size did the defendant wear?
When he was arrested, he was wearing size 11 shoes.
Well, what about witnesses? Did you find any of those?
Yes, there was actually a witness that saw the murder take place.
Well, sir, I want to be perfectly clear about what that witness did and didn't see. Who was that person?
His name is Mr. Bellamy Dembski, and he was the next door neighbor.
Do you know if he was familiar with someone named Adriana Capella?
Yes, my understanding that he lived right next to them for years.
Well, did he say the person he saw that night was Adriana Capella?
No, he actually indicated the person was male.
Did he say the person looked like a woman at all?
No.
So let's talk about what that eyewitness did see. What did they actually report seeing that night?
That night, they reported seeing a tall 5'11" man who weighed between 170 and 190 pounds come up behind the victim, use a pair of jumper cables, and strangle them to death.
I want to break that down for the members of the jury. How tall again did that eyewitness place that attacker?
About 5'10" or 5'11".
How tall is this defendant?
5'11".
What weight did that eyewitness place the attacker at?
Around 180 pounds.
How much does this defendant weigh?
182 pounds.
Did that eyewitness see a car at all?
Yes, the eyewitness indicated that it saw a dark-colored luxury sports car.
What car was the defendant driving that weekend?
A dark green Ferrari.
Sir, who did that witness identify as the attacker that night?
When shown a picture of Mr. Augie Shepard, the witness identified Augie Shepard as the murderer.
Thank you. Marshal. Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Do you need this witness to continue to hold on to these jumper cables?
No, Your Honor. Permission to publish to the members of the jury?
We'll just put them here for now.
No worries, Your Honor.
Ms. Scanlon, if you want access to these jumper cables, you just let me know.
Sure,
Just
thank
put
you.
them there. And when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Deputy.
Good morning.
Deputy, I want to start just where you left off. You said on direct examination that you had an eyewitness identification of Augie Shepard.
That's correct. Someone that matched the profile of Augie Shepard.
Deputy, I want to be clear. That eyewitness you mentioned couldn't be sure of the attacker's hair color.
He wasn't exactly sure, but he thought it was black.
Couldn't be sure of the attacker's race.
He wasn't exactly sure, but he thought that it was white.
You know that that eyewitness never even saw the attacker's face.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, then I want to talk about the evidence you have and whether or not it's consistent with Mr. Shepard having committed this crime. Because, Deputy, you think that this attacker came from behind, right?
That's correct.
You know that the attacker and the victim must have been in pretty close contact with one another?
Yes.
Deputy, you didn't find any of Mr. Shepard's DNA on the victim?
No, we didn't. And that's consistent with a professional mob killing.
Didn't find any of Mr. Shepard's fingerprints on Barry Capella?
No, the witness indicated that the attacker was wearing gloves.
No skin cells?
No.
No hair?
No.
No saliva?
No, it was a very cleanly and well done murder. Again, consistent with a professional.
On our permission to approach the bench and retrieve those jumper cables?
Go ahead.
Deputy, you also talked about these jumper cables on direct examination, right?
Yes,
You sent these to your forensic lab for testing?
that's correct.
You didn't find Augie Shepard's DNA on these jumper cables?
No, we did not.
Didn't find his fingerprints either?
No, as I mentioned, the murderer was wearing gloves.
Then I want to talk about the evidence that you do have. So you had access to Augie Shepard's cell phone, right?
That's correct, or at least the cell phone that Augie Shepard reported to us.
You don't have any indication that he had another phone he didn't report, did you?
We don't know whether or not he had another phone.
You have no idea.
No, we don't know. Mr. Shepard only reported the same phone.
More importantly than that phone, you actually had access to the cell phone data, right?
Yes, from that phone.
That data, it allows you to track a person's location down to the minute.
To be specific, it allows you to track the phone's location.
That's right, Deputy. It allows you to track a cell phone's location down to the minute.
That's correct.
You believe this murder occurred between midnight and 1 a.m. of June 26th?
That's what the autopsy indicates.
Sir, that cell phone between midnight and 1 a.m. was at Augie Shepard's hotel.
That's correct. That's what the GPS data says. However, there are actually some issues of inconsistencies there. Would you like me to explain?
Sure, Deputy.
So we had evidence that there was actually a phone call that didn't appear in those records. And so we don't know whether the phone that Augie Shepard had was the only phone he had.
Deputy, you have no evidence that there was a different phone?
Augie Shepard didn't report a second phone.
And that one phone that you know of was in the hotel room the entire night?
That's correct.
It's also your theory that Augie Shepard saw Barry Capello at his office in Los Angeles.
Yes, Mr. Capello told us that.
That later that night he drove to Barry Capello's home to kill him.
That's correct.
How did he get the address?
We're unsure. However, as the leader of the DeBruno crime family, Mr. Augie Shepard had access to a number of resources the average person would not be able to tap into.
Let me just get this right. When you talk about other resources, that's your guess of how we could have found that address.
We don't know for sure. Mr. Shepard did not cooperate with our investigation.
You know that Barry Capello was in the witness protection program?
That's correct.
You know that his address wasn't publicly listed anywhere.
Yes, I do my best to hide our witnesses as best we can.
You also know that Barry Capello had a wife, right?
That's correct. Miss Adriana Capello.
You know that when Barry Capello entered the witness protection program, Adriana Capello was relocated with him.
That's correct. She became Mrs. Drea Kline.
She had to lose contact with her friends,
Yes, she agreed not to contact any previous friends or family.
had to lose contact with her parents.
Yes.
Deputy, you're aware that Adriana Capello has 2 living parents.
That's correct.
At the time of the murder, she hadn't been able to talk to them in 3 years.
Yes, that's the price that people pay for safety.
You're aware she had a small business?
That's correct.
She had to give up that too.
Yes.
Had to give up her own name.
Yes.
Deputy Adriana Capello was at the scene of the crime.
Yes, it's our understanding that Mrs. Adriana Capello was at her own house that night.
She was at the scene of the crime at the time this murder occurred.
That is our understanding.
She was the first person to call 911.
Yes.
She was the first person to accuse that Mr. Shepard had committed this crime.
Yes, in our initial interview, she indicated that her husband was scared of Mr. Shepard.
So that's the yes to my question. She was the first person to accuse Mr. Shepard.
Yes.
She also said that she went outside, found the body, called 911, right?
That's correct.
Objection, Your Honor. At this time, these questions are calling for hearsay. These are all out-of-court statements from Adriana Capello, and Ms. Scanlon is offering for the truth of the matter asserted to prove that's what she actually did that night. It's the defense's entire theory of the case.
May I respond?
Not yet. Mr. Harper, first, if you have an objection, just state the grounds.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll give you a chance to make the argument if I'm not going to just immediately grant your objection, so don't worry, you'll be heard.
Of course, Your Honor, my apologies.
It's okay. What are you specifically objecting to, this particular answer, or do you want me to consider other answers besides the one we just heard?
Your Honor, at this point, the line of questioning was going towards proving the truth of the matter asserted. At
Okay.
first, it seemed like it was just his subsequent course of conduct.
Okay, hang on. So I'm not going to entertain an objection about a line of questioning with
Of course
respect to hearsay. If you have an objection about relevance or something, I would think of it more as a whole. With respect to hearsay, though, let's just focus on his most recent answer. Are you objecting to the most recent answer as hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Scanlon?
Yes, Your Honor, we're not using these statements for the truth of the matter asserted. Instead, we're using it to prove an inconsistency. My previous question was that Adriana Capello claimed she went outside, saw the body, called 911. My next line of questioning was that is a mismatch with the neighbor's account that Mr. Harper talked about. We're using this to prove an inconsistency. It's not being used for the truth of the matter.
Okay, remind me what your last question to this witness was?
Yes, Your Honor, it was Adriana Capello claims that she went outside, saw the body, called 911.
And you're saying that a subsequent question will contrast what she said she did with what somebody else said that she did?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Harper, anything else you'd like to say that I didn't give you a chance to say already?
Yes, Your Honor, just really quickly, again,
Sure.
Ms. Scanlon got up in opening statements and said this woman was the person that killed him. Now she's asking questions about whether or not she went outside, whether or not she looked at the body. These are clearly being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Okay, the objection's overruled, but Mr. Harper, if you have a continuing concern that subsequent questions are being offered for the truth, you may keep objecting. As to this particular answer, based on counsel's representation and what I've heard so far, I don't believe that the purpose it's being offered for is its hearsay purpose, nor do I think that there is a risk that the jury will consider it that way. But that's not to foreclose you continuing to object along the same lines if the next one or all of them are, in your opinion, hearsay. So it's overruled for now, but you tell me if you want me to consider further statements.
Yes, Your Honor.
So for the moment, the objection's overruled. Do you remember the question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you can go ahead and answer the question.
Yes. So, yes, Ms. Adriana Capello told us that she went outside and called 911.
Deputy, that's inconsistent with the neighbor's statement.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean.
Sir, Mr. Harper, he questioned you about Bellamy Dembski's affidavit, right?
That's correct, yes.
Bellamy Dembski never said that he saw Adriana Capello come outside.
No, it's our understanding that Mr. Dembski went back inside after he witnessed the murder.
Objection, Your Honor. At this time, I'd like to re-raise my objection to hearsay.
Your objection is to hearsay about Ms. Capello's statement or Mr. Dembski's statement?
To Ms. Capello's statement. Mr. Dembski's statements are already on the record. It was one of those affidavits we admitted.
Okay, so the proposed statement from Ms. Capello is, I went outside?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay,
If I may be heard briefly on those grounds.
you may.
Your Honor, Ms. Scanlon's argument was premised on the fact that there would be a contradiction or an inconsistency between those two statements. But the witness actually just testified that Mr. Dembski went back inside, so he actually couldn't have seen Ms. Capello. There's no contradiction. At this point, those statements are still being used for the truth of the matter asserted. We need to hear that actual contradiction in order for it to actually not be hearsay.
Okay, Ms. Scanlon, anything you'd like to say?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Harper's objection goes to the weight, not the admissibility of the testimony. The court can decide whether or not they found an inconsistency, but we've already laid on the record plain and clear that Mr. Dembski never saw Adriana come outside and see the body. Furthermore, Your Honor, if I could proffer,
You may.
you'll learn that when Bellamy Dembski went inside to call the police said that they were already on their way because of a prior 911 call from Adriana Capello. This means that Adriana Capello's timeline had to be prior to when Bellamy Dembski returned inside.
Okay, hang on. Now that I'm sorry to say this bluntly, but the proffer makes no sense to me.
Yes, sir.
It's only because I don't understand, because you both understand the case to a much greater degree than I do. So I'm going to ignore the proffer because I don't want to say anything foolish. However, based on what I've heard so far, the hearsay objection is overruled because I'm hearing that maybe Miss Capello went outside and maybe she didn't, and maybe Mr. Dembski saw her and maybe he didn't. But it seems to me the central point that the defense is trying to raise is these two people are giving conflicting accounts. And the fact that those accounts conflict is reason enough to doubt what each of them said. And that is sufficient for the jury to consider. When I asked, Mr. Harper, if you have continuing concerns about further testimony, you may raise them. But I don't want you to re-raise any objections, as everything I've heard is just going to stay in and my mind is made up. But if further testimony comes out about other things that happened that night, you may object on whatever grounds you want, including hearsay.
Of course, Your Honor.
So the objection's overruled, all the answers will stand. You go ahead and ask your next question. We'll presume the jury heard and remembered everything.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Deputy, just to be clear, Bellamy Dembski never reported seeing Adriana Capello come out of her home.
No, as I said, Mr. Dembski went back inside.
Mr. Dembski never reports seeing Adriana Capello at all.
No, like I said, he was inside his house afterwards.
You also know, Deputy, that the Capellos had a dog.
That's correct.
Dog named Fantic.
Yes.
And you know from the neighbor's statement that Fantic would always bark at strangers.
Yes, that's what Mr. Dembski said.
I told you that if a dog came near the home, or a stranger came near the home, Fantic would bark.
Yes, that's correct.
Deputy, you'd agree with me that Fantic knew the Capellos, knew Adriana Capello?
Yes, he was their dog.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation, if I may be heard.
You may.
Your Honor, the familiarity that some dog can have for another person is speculative. Your Honor, we can't know for certain what a dog did or did not know. And moreover, Your Honor, it's more prejudicial than probative. We don't know who the dog was familiar with. At this point, this evidence has very little probative value. Certainly, we can testify as to whether or not the dog barked, but going into the details of who the dog knew and who he didn't, that's more prejudicial than probative and speculative.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, again, Mr. Harper's objection goes to the weight, not the admissibility of the testimony. Certainly reasonable to ask if Adriana Capello, the owner of this dog, was a stranger to the dog. We don't believe that there's sufficient speculation to make this inadmissible.
Okay. I think in a forum like this, we are all trying to use the perfect word, often with the most syllables possible. And I think that trying to describe how a dog feels about a human is hard. I am not inclined to reject testimony, although I, in substance, agree with you, Mr. Harper. Who knows what a dog is thinking? I don't know how else to describe it to the jury other than, like, is the dog familiar? Who knows, right? I do think lay witnesses understand that, like, sometimes dogs bark at strangers, and I think what we're all getting at is they're not strangers, right? So I'm just going to let it go, and the objection's overruled. Go ahead.
Of
Yes,
course,
Your
Your
Honor.
Honor.
So, Deputy, you know that Adriana Capello wasn't a stranger to her dog.
No, she wasn't.
Ms. Muntz, if you could read from line 34 of the neighbor's statement.
I didn't hear a peep from Fantic.
Ms. Muntz, just to be clear, was that on the night of the murder?
It was.
Objection, Your Honor. Attorney testifying. If it may be heard.
You may not. It's overruled. Go
Yes,
ahead.
Your Honor.
Your Honor, I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Wright, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Harper, redirect
Yes, Your Honor.
when you're ready.
Good morning again, Marshal.
Good morning.
Ms. Scanlon asked you lots of questions about DNA, fingerprints, things like that. How common is it to see that type of evidence in cases like these?
Well, normally killers leave behind DNA. However, in a professional mob killing, it's actually very uncommon.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to read a portion of that witness's affidavit onto the record.
Which witness are you talking about?
The pre-admitted affidavit of Mr. Bellamy Dembski.
Okay, and just to be clear, Ms. Scanlon, was that the affidavit from which your colleague just read?
Yes, it was.
Okay, go ahead, counsel.
The person continued to strangle Tom from behind. Tom was flailing. The attacker seemed calm and controlled. He was wearing dark clothes and dark gloves. I have one more thing to ask you about, Marshal. What's a burner phone?
Well, my understanding is that a burner phone is a secondary phone that criminals might use to avoid being traced on their primary phone.
Well, if you're investigating a suspect, would you expect them to tell you, I had a burner phone?
Generally, you wouldn't expect a criminal to implicate themselves.
Would you expect to find that burner phone?
The only way we would find it is if we were actually able to turn it up in a search of the house.
And did you search Mr. Capello, the defendant's home?
We were unable to. He did not cooperate with our investigation.
Did you find any burner phones?
We did not find any burner phones.
Thank you, Marshal. Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Okay, I'm sorry for being unfamiliar. Are you allowed to just recross and redirect to your heart's content?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Scanlon?
Yes, Your Honor, recross.
Go ahead.
Deputy, Mr. Harper just asked you about DNA, right?
That's correct.
He asked you about fingerprints.
Yes.
Deputy, did you test to see whether Adriana Capello's DNA was on the murder weapon?
Yes, we tested all of the murder weapon, the forensic evidence in the area, and we didn't turn out anything that's Mr. Capello's DNA.
Sir, I'm asking about the murder weapon specifically. And you didn't test to see whether Adriana Capello's DNA was on that murder weapon.
Now, I didn't test the murder weapon, the actual forensic examiner did. And the forensic examiner tests for any DNA that is on any murder weapon.
Sir, you would recognize the forensic test you looked at, right?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel with the forensic report. It's Exhibit 4.
All right,
Approaching the witness with the same.
go ahead.
Deputy, it's your testimony that the forensic lab checked for Adriana Capello's DNA specifically?
It doesn't say Adriana Capello's DNA specifically. However, the forensic lab identifies any DNA and then goes in for further testing.
You aware the DNA of Adriana Capello's in the system to test?
No, I do not know whether Adriana Capello's DNA is in the system or not.
Certainly, Deputy, you don't see the name.
Seems
If I
like,
could finish my question.
I don't know what the rules are. Mr. Harper, how do you feel about it?
Your Honor, we can have one more question. That's
All right, you can finish your question. You can provide a yes or no answer if possible, and then we'll be done with recross. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. Certainly, Deputy, you don't see Adriana Capello's name on that forensic lab report.
No, Adriana Capello's name does
Yes.
not appear on this report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll take that back from you.
Mr. Harper, redirect.
There's no further questions for the Marshal. He can step down, Your Honor, with the court's permission.
All right. Thank you, Marshal, for your testimony, sir.
Thank you.
You're excused.
This time, the government also rests its case in chief.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Harper. Ms. Scanlon, are you ready to call your witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Lauren Shepard to the stand.
All right. Ms. Shepard. You can have a seat. Ms. Shepard, did you hear the admonitions such as they were that I gave to the marshal?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you understand them?
Yes, I think so.
Great. Ms. Scanlon, when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Shepard.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, I'm Lauren Shepard.
Where are you from?
I'm from right outside Philadelphia, Lower Merion area.
Are you in school?
Well, I just graduated high school back in Philly, but I'm hoping to go to college out here, actually.
Do you know Augie Shepard?
Yeah, that's my dad, Augie Shepard. He's on trial today. I think that's why I'm here.
Do you know Barry Capello?
Yeah, we call him Uncle Barry. He was my dad's friend. He joined us at holidays, New Year's, Thanksgiving ones. I was really sad to hear about what happened to him.
Then I want to talk about the day of June 25th, 2021.
Okay.
Where were you that day?
We were here in LA, actually. I told my dad I wanted to go to college out west, so we organized a whole trip. That day we took a tour around UCLA, got lunch, went out to dinner. It was really nice.
At any point during that day, do you remember seeing a place called Kline Travel?
I think so. It might have been one of the stores we were walking past, going to different restaurants.
Did your dad point it out?
No, he didn't.
Did he ever do a double take?
I don't think so.
Also said earlier that you know Barry Capello. If you saw him around, would you recognize him?
Yeah, I think so. I practically grew up with Uncle Barry.
Did you see Barry Capello that day?
No.
Did your dad say he'd seen Barry Capello?
No, he didn't.
Did he ever mention Mr. Capello's name?
No, not that I remember.
What did you do that night?
Well, we went back to the hotel, and then, well, my friend texted me and said there was a party that she wanted us to go to, so I went to that.
What time did you leave for that party?
Maybe around 11:30, 11:45.
Miss Shepard, when you left for that party, what was your dad doing?
He had passed out from a long day. He was sleeping in the hotel.
Right, then what time did you get back from the party?
A little late, I think around 3 a.m.
What was your dad doing then?
Still sleeping.
And were you with your dad the following day?
Yeah, I was.
Well, then I want to talk about what he looked like. Did you see any injuries on Mr. Capello, on Mr. Shepard, sorry?
No, I mean, I don't think I saw anything like that.
Did he ever complain that he was hurting?
No, he wasn't.
Miss Muntz, if you could read from line 28 of the neighbor's account of the attack.
Someone came up behind him and wrapped something around his neck. The person started to strangle Tom.
Did you ever see any scratches on your dad's arms or hands?
No, definitely not.
Did you see any scratches on his face?
No, I didn't see any scratches. I mean, I don't think anything happened to him like that.
All right, Miss Muntz, if you could read the next line.
The two of them fell backward onto the ground. The person continued to strangle Tom from behind.
Miss Shepard, that day, the 26th, did your father ever complain of any back pain?
No, I mean, he might have been a little sick of walking around everywhere, but we were having a really good trip.
Did he ever say that he had any bruises on his back? Did you see any?
No, I didn't.
Miss Muntz, if you could read the next line.
Tom was flailing.
Miss Shepard, did you see any scratches or bruises anywhere on the body of your father?
No, my dad seems perfectly okay.
Well, then I want to move on and talk about the government's investigation of your father. So you were questioned by the FBI.
Yes, yeah, I was.
Were you truthful in everything you told them?
Of course.
What about the night of the 25th?
Well, I didn't tell them about the party at first, if that's what you're asking, but eventually, I did fess up.
So eventually, Miss Shepard, were you truthful about everything you told the FBI?
Yes.
In that FBI interview, did they ever mention or show you these jumper cables?
No, they didn't.
Did you rent a car in Los Angeles?
We did.
How long did you rent that car?
Well, we flew into Oakland, and that's when we got the car, and our trip was about a week long, so maybe 5-6 days.
5-6 days, ma'am. In those 5 or 6 days, did you ever see these jumper cables in your father's rental car?
No, I didn't.
And I want to talk about Adriana Capello. Do you know who that is?
Mm-hmm. That's Uncle Barry's wife.
Did the FBI investigators ever ask you anything about Adriana Capello?
No, they didn't.
Did they ever mention the name Adriana Capello?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Shepard. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Harper, cross-exam.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Shepard.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions. Now, you say your dad, he's not in the model, right?
No, he works in waste management.
Let's talk about that. Ma'am, you got a Mercedes-Benz for your birthday, right?
Yeah.
Your brother got a Mercedes-Benz?
Mm-hmm.
Your mom drives a Porsche?
Yeah.
You live in a 6,000-foot home?
I'm not sure. I think it's about that.
It's a 6,000-foot home, ma'am?
That sounds right.
You own a yacht?
My parents own a yacht, yeah.
You're going to college soon?
I hope so.
And what does your dad do?
Well, He told me he works in waste management, that's his job.
So he paid for a Mercedes Benz, 2 Mercedes Benz, a Porsche, a yacht, and a 6,000-foot home working in waste management?
I guess so. I think maybe he's an executive, something like that.
But it's still your testimony that he's not in the mob, right?
Yeah.
Ms. Osborne, can you read a portion of FBI expert Jess Falkenstein onto the record?
Lines 43 to 45. Indeed, members of the DeBruno crime family deny the existence of the DeBruno crime family. Nonetheless, I am certain that the DeBruno crime family exists and that Augie Shepard is the acting boss.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Well, let's move on to that trip. Because earlier you talked to Ms. Scanlon about that FBI investigation. Isn't that true?
Mm-hmm.
Asked about the questions the FBI asked you, right?
Yeah.
Now, your exact words is, I didn't tell them about the party, right?
Right. When my friend texted me, I guess I decided to sneak out. It worked. My dad never found out about it, and I didn't think they knew either at first.
You didn't just not tell them, you lied.
Right.
Because those FBI experts, they said, well, where were you all day, right?
Yeah.
You said, I was with my dad all day, right?
Right, on our college tours.
They said, where were you at night in particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said, I was with my dad all night.
Yeah, that's what I said at first, and then they showed me my Uber receipts, so I knew they knew about the party.
Right, man, that was a lie.
Yeah.
And then they asked you, well, what time did you get back from that party, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said, oh, I got back at 12:30, true?
That's what I said at first.
Ma'am, that was a lie.
I guess so.
Well, ma'am, do you guess or not? It wasn't the truth, was it?
No, it wasn't.
You got back at 3 a.m.
That's right.
So from the hours of 11 to 3 a.m., you weren't with your father, right?
No, I wasn't.
From the hours of 11 to 3 a.m., you don't know where your father was.
Well, he was sleeping when I left the hotel, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, you can't tell us exactly where your father was from 11 to 3 a.m., true?
I guess not.
You can't tell us exactly what your father was doing from 11 to 3 a.m., can you?
I guess I can't say for sure.
Man, but you do know Mr. Capello died that night.
That's what the investigator Wright told me.
Well, let's talk about your family's relationship with Mr. Capello. Because like you said, you used to be family with him, isn't that true?
Mm-hmm.
You called him uncle.
Yeah, Uncle Barry.
Spent time with him?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you met his dog once or twice?
I may have, yeah.
Well, that changed though, didn't it, ma'am?
Yeah, a few years ago, Uncle Barry said some things about my family. I don't think they were true, but my dad stopped being friends with him then.
Well, your dad was telling you about that trial, right?
Yes.
Your dad told you, well, Mr. Capello, he testified against us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your dad told you, Mr. Capello, he said I was a mob boss, right?
That's what Uncle Barry said.
And your dad, he was upset, wasn't he, ma'am?
Yeah, I think that was hard to hear, coming from his friend.
He said, Uncle Barry is a rat. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
He didn't say Uncle Barry's a liar, right?
No.
He didn't say Uncle Barry's making us all up.
No.
He said Uncle Barry is a rat. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's what he said.
He said Uncle Barry is dead to this family, right?
Yeah, I don't think he was going to come over anymore for holidays.
Mr. Capello's dead now, isn't he?
He is.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Ms. Scanlon, redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that Ms. Shepard be excused.
You may. Thank you, Ms. Shepard, for your testimony.
Thank you.
You're excused. Defense, do you have any more witnesses? I'm sorry, I know you don't have more witnesses, but do you have more evidence to offer?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests our case in chief. We're ready to go with closing arguments.
Okay. Mr. Harper, excuse me, are you ready to proceed straight into closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Just one moment to prepare for closing argument.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you, we're going to go off the record for 3 minutes. You can take a few minutes to write notes, speak to each other, whatever you need.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yep. My watch says 10:36, so when it says 10:39, I will remind you and we'll start.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Of course.
Ready to go, Your Honor?
You got another minute.
Of course.
Okay. We are back on the record. Parties have indicated that they are prepared to go to closing arguments, and we'll hear first from the people and Mr. Harper. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court? Ms. Scanlon. Members of the jury. He made the right choice against the wrong person. It's June 25th, 2021. And Barry Capello is terrified. After 3 years of living in Los Angeles, 3 years of being disconnected from his friends, from his family, from his life, he sees the one person that put him there. He sees this defendant. He calls the marshal that relocated him. He thinks, how could this be happening? This can't be happening. He's scared. But the phone rings and rings. And Marshall never picks up. So he leaves a voicemail.
Call me when you get this. I think they found me. Officer Shepard just walked by my office window. We made eye contact.
Here's the thing, members of the jury. Mr. Capello knew better than anyone that he was in danger. He knew that he had made the right choice against the wrong person. And just 12 hours after he left this voicemail, his wife finds him strangled to death, bruises on his neck, motionless on the ground. Where is Adriana Capello? She's at home grieving her dead husband. But the defense doesn't want you to hear that. Because we've charged this defendant with 2 crimes today. Murder and retaliation against a witness. And we've been upfront, members of the jury. We carry the burden of proof in today's trial. That means it's our job and our job alone to prove to you those elements are true beyond a reasonable doubt. We have to prove to you that the defendant killed Mr. Capello. He did so deliberately. And he did so intending to retaliate against him for that trial. And we've met our burden today, members of the jury. Because we've asked you to pay attention to 3 simple facts. So I want you to listen to those facts and the evidence that we've heard today. Let's walk through them one by one. First, the defendant wanted Mr. Capello dead. Members of the jury, we all know what the mob is, and we know the consequences for testifying against the mob, much less testifying that the mob boss was this defendant in open court. So what do you think happened? You think he finally pulled out his book of forgiveness? Think he said, oh, never mind? No. The defense's own witness told you herself, my dad said that man is dead to my family. 3 years later, what was he? Dead. Killed by a professional criminal in the middle of the night. So let's go to that second fact. The defendant actually ran into Mr. Capello that day. Members of the jury, you're going to have this voicemail in the deliberation room. I want you to listen to it. Because Mr. Capello says himself, I just saw Mr. Shepard, but you don't even have to take his word for it, members of the jury. The marshal told you. We have receipts from where that defendant was that day. We know he ate next door to Mr. Capello's place of work. So, that leaves us with one question. How do we know he was there that night? Simple fact number 3. The defendant was seen at the scene of the crime. You heard eyewitness testimony today. And that eyewitness testimony was pretty specific. He said he saw the attacker go up to Mr. Capello, strangle him from behind, cool and collected. He was wearing black clothes, wearing black gloves. And listen to the descriptions, members of the jury. He said that attacker was 5'11". What's the defendant 5'11"? He said that attacker was 180 pounds. What's the defendant 180 pounds? There were footprints that were size 11 leading up to that driveway. Oh, and I guess what is the defendant's shoe size? Size 11. Frankly, members of the jury, does a 5'11", 180-pound man sound like Adriana Capello? Is it really reasonable to believe that her own neighbor wouldn't be able to recognize her in a photo? Is it reasonable to believe that person is Adriana Capello when that witness himself identified this defendant as that attacker? They want you to believe Adriana Capello wouldn't file for divorce. No, she would kill him. And when the defense presents you a story like that, they don't have a burden, but you're allowed to ask yourself if it makes sense, members of the jury. And it doesn't. You know what does? Barry Capello made the right choice. He knew he was risking his life testifying against the mob. Because he made the right choice against the wrong people. And he paid for it, members of the jury. That's why we ask you to find this defendant guilty on both counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Ms. Scanlon.
Yes, Your Honor. Just a moment to set up.
Take your time.
Your Honor, Mr. Harper, members of the jury, where is Adriana Capello? I want you to think about what the state is asking you to believe. Because they're asking you to believe that someone came behind Barry Capello with a cape, strangled him, that he tussled on the ground, that he killed him, and left no DNA, no fingerprints, no skin cells, no hair, no saliva. They're asking you to believe that even though Mr. Shepard's cell phone, the only known cell phone owned by Mr. Shepard, even though that it was at the hotel the entire night, that Augie Shepard was just somehow miles away at a residence that's not publicly listed anywhere. Members of the jury, their story doesn't add up. It doesn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So consider the alternative. Adriana Capello. Because we know that she had a motive. That when Barry Capello joined the witness protection program, Miss Capello had to give up everything. Contact with her friends, her family, her parents, her small business, her name, members of the jury. We know that she had the means and the opportunity as well. She knew where Barry Capello lived. She lived with him. She was at the scene of the crime at the time of the crime, members of the jury, and the prosecution can't rule her out. Now, I want you to remember that we don't have to prove that Adriana Capello committed this crime. We, as the defense, we don't have a burden. But it's the prosecution's job to prove that she didn't. And today, the government wasn't able to do that. See, today they came to court with a high burden. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest bar in our legal system, that Augie Shepard murdered Barry Capello as retaliation against a witness. Today, they didn't meet that burden, and to show you exactly why, I want you to remember those two problems we talked about in that opening statement. The evidence that's inconsistent with Augie Shepard committing this crime, and second, the evidence that points to Adriana Capello. So let's talk first about the evidence that's inconsistent, and I just want to go through the prosecution's case that they brought forth, the way they organized the direct examination of Connor Wright. Because they first talked about gloves, that Augie Shepard might have had gloves when he killed Barry Capello. Members of the jury, this man was coming out of town to visit colleges with his daughter. The prosecution admits that too. Do you think packing for June in Los Angeles gloves would make the cut? We also know that the government had access to his credit card records. They didn't find any record that Augie Shepard purchased gloves here in Los Angeles. They also talked about size 11 shoe prints. Members of the jury, they didn't tell you what shoe print Barry Capello had. Perfectly reasonable that he too had size 11 shoe prints. Members of the jury, that's reasonable. Yeah. Talk too about an eyewitness identification. Heard today that eyewitness never even saw the attacker's face. Said he thought it was a man, said he thought he had short hair. He wasn't sure of his race, of his hair color. He wasn't sure about anything because he never saw the attacker front forward. They also talked in that direct examination about these cables right here. They were suspiciously missing from the rental car rented by Mr. Shepard. Members of the jury, we've got the rental agreement right here, Exhibit 10. It said that rental car was rented by 17 other people after Augie Shepard. It's perfectly reasonable that one of those 17 other renters took those jumper car cables, did something else with them. Members of the jury, all of that is reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt that is stacking against the government's case, makes them unable to prove the charges they brought here to court. So consider the alternative. Where is Adriana Capello? Because today you heard that when Barry Capello joined the witness protection program, his wife lost everything. Has two living parents, friends, family members that she hasn't been able to say a word to in 3 years. Mr. Jury, I'd be angry. We learned that on June 25th of 2021, Adriana Capello was presented with the perfect opportunity. that she learns that the man her husband has testified against is suddenly out in town, that she can get revenge and pin it on Mr. Shepard, that the police wouldn't think twice. Wouldn't think twice about an alleged mob boss that they've been trying to get for years. Where is Adriana Capello? Because Mr. Harper also said in his closing argument, does a 5'11", 180 person sound like Adriana Capello? Members of the jury, that's not for you to decide. That's for the prosecution to prove to you in court. They didn't bring her here today. They didn't talk about what she looked like. That's reasonable doubt. That is a piece of the puzzle of the prosecution's case that they are wholly missing. Could have known if the description from that eyewitness fit Adriana Capello to a T, but we don't. Because the prosecution wouldn't tell you if she did. Mr. Harper got up here in his opening statement. He said he made the right choice, but got the wrong person. Members of the jury, the government's got the wrong person on trial today. That's why we ask you to find Augie Shepard not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
May it please the court? Ms. Scanlon's right. Usually in cases like these, you expect to see DNA, maybe fingerprints. But think about what this case is about, members of the jury. This isn't your neighborhood robber. This isn't your shoplifter. This is the mob. People who have devoted their lives to committing crimes and getting away with it. And isn't it such a shocker that they didn't leave a trace when that's what they've been doing their entire career? So consider the alternative, just like Ms. Scanlon is asking you to believe. That it's just a coincidence that the same day this defendant goes to LA is the same day that the person that testified against him is dead. And it's just a coincidence that the eyewitness saw a 5'11", 180-pound man and that he had size 11 shoes and just happened to mistake her for a woman. A random woman that he hadn't even met at that point in time. Members of the jury, the defense's case doesn't make sense. You know what does? Mr. Capello made the right choice. And it's the wrong person. Find this defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. With that, the matter submitted. We're off the record. Great job, everybody. You guys are great. I think we can all submit our ballots electronically, and they're fairly quick to fill out. In fact, mine is submitted. Why don't we just kind of wait awkwardly and quietly until